Thanks for joining us today. Another beautiful day in what is still a very fragile republic at this point. Very exciting show planned for you today. Our good friend and daily contributor at sgtreport.com, Rory.
I'm here. How's it going?
It's going great. How you doing, man?
I'm doing quite well. I'm very excited about today.
Well, I am too. And Rory, thank you for helping to set up this interview with Greg Hunter from USAWatchdog.com, a journalist by trade and a truth teller, now fully entrenched in the camp of those on the side of this republic. Greg, welcome. It's really great to hear your voice and finally connect with you.
Well, good to connect with you guys. I know you came and defended me for my Robert Kiyosaki interview.
Oh, my Lord. You know what? I want to talk about that. I do think that is very funny that people have their opinions and then they're so willing to throw those who are, going under the barbed wire first, Mr. Hunter, guys like you, under the bus. And I don't understand it because I thought that was a pretty interesting interview. But
I thought it was pretty interesting, too. And, he kind of – it took me a year to get him. It really took me a year. It takes a long time to get some of these people, and as my site grows, I guess it'll take maybe a half a year in the future.
Yeah.
But what a lot of people got really angry with is at the end, I'm signing off and saying thank you, Robert Kiyosaki, and he says, hey, one last thing. I wrote a book about Rich Dad prophecies. I'm paraphrasing, and he said, I just guessed on something and said the stock market would crash in 2016, and I totally made that up, and I'm like, oh my God. Selling this information as an analysis, and I think really people got upset by that. Listen, I think he's a smart guy, and when he broke out and said, people don't realize what Detroit going bankrupt means. They just have no idea what it means. I thought that was, and when you start drilling down in the words of wisdom like that, America equals a bankruptcy. That Detroit is bankrupt. I had one firefighter contact me about Detroit, and he's been working for 29 years. He was allowed to opt out of Social Security, and all he has is his pension. Well, the pensions in Detroit are reportedly $9 billion underfunded. We're talking about a giant red hole of nothing. $9 billion, and they didn't just get this is one city, and they didn't get underfunded in 1 year. Last year they weren't totally funded, and this year they're $9 billion underfunded. And my point is, they have been careening towards underfunding. The union failed them, the politicians failed them, and they failed themselves for not being able to do simple math, thinking, they won't let that happen. And I'm telling you, what's going to happen in the future is hideous. Anybody thinking that somebody's going to ride in and F somebody, that ain't going to happen. The whole hurricane. We're screwed. Please unscrew us. No. No, that ain't coming in the future.
No, you're right. And the way it's set up in Detroit, I believe, is for the international banks to get 75 cents on the dollar, while the average pensioner might be lucky to get a dime on the dollar, probably far less. And that's essentially austerity. But, there's so many things we could talk about today, Greg. But I think in fairness to the audience, I want people to know you worked for ABC News and Good Morning America for nearly 6 years. You also worked over at CNN in the belly of the beast on such shows as Paul Hazan Now, American Morning, and various CNN business shows. And, I think you're a very inspiring person, Greg, because here you are, a real journalist who made the switch into real journalism. And I think everybody who believes in truth and truthful reporting ought to visit USAWatchdog.com on a daily basis. Certainly, we're always eager to post your material. And I just wanted to ask you, how did you wake up and how did you become this truth journalist? I think there's great examples of others out doing a similar thing. Emerging truth journalists like Ben Swan, Anthony Gucciardi, Aaron Dykes and Melissa Melton, Luke Rudowski, Michael Snyder, Max Slavo, great people out there. How did you transition from the Mockingbird news media into this real truth journalist on the side of freedom and humanity?
Well, when I got to the networks in the 2000s, I was still able to do real investigative work and have that moment where we shamed some people and we got people's money back, and we, and CNN allowed me to do depleted uranium munitions, which is, basically a rod of metal that burns at 4,000 degrees. That'll cut through anything. And when it hits, it aspirates into a cloud of tiny microscopic heavy metal. When you breathe in, they're yours forever. Yeah, I did stuff like that at CNN. I was also doing stuff on the business shows, and I always was a kind of I would read the business pages because I was, interested in business and money and having something, and I didn't understand what was going on. So the more I looked at it, I tried to understand, the clearer it got. And I was having arguments with Jerry Willis in the halls of CNN. She stopped me in the elevator one day and said, "How can you say this mortgage crisis is not going to be contained?" I said, "Jerry, my sources say," and I had some good ones, and they were obviously right.
Right.
I said, my sources say it's going to affect all stratifications of real estate, commercial, residential, high-end, low-end, you name it. It's not going to be contained. She says, well, my sources. I said, well, your sources, have skin in the game, and you're a parrot for them. Well, she wrote this book that you never heard about right at the peak of the real estate market, and was coming out with it and doing, promotion for it and stuff like that. And it was terrible advice. It was and we're headed for another collapse in real estate prices. Anybody who doesn't think, who thinks that this is over. I was listening on mainstream TV today on Fox. Oh, we're at the bottom. Really? We're at the bottom. Okay, let's do some math here. We're at the bottom. So the 10-year Treasury has gone up about double, not nearly, but almost double. Mm-hmm. And the 30-year mortgage is set up 10-year Treasury, and it's at 2.8%? Yeah, 2.8%. And that's given us a 4.5% 30-year mortgage, right? And it went from 3.5 or 3.6%, somewhere in that, 3.5 to 4.5, roughly. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so the average 10-year Treasury is 4%. The average over the last 40 years. So if we're getting a 4.5%. With 2.8% Treasury, then wow, what's going to happen if it goes back to 4%? What do we get then for a 30-year? Oh my goodness, we'll get a 7% mortgage rate, which ain't bad, but still 7% from 4.5%. Guess what's going to happen to prices?
Right.
Guess what America's favorite question is? What are the payments, man?
The government needs to worry about those payments too, because, look what the outgoing expenditure is just to maintain the national debt. The interest payments also rise for the government to the point
Correct.
Of being completely unsustainable.
Well, listen, people like John Williams, and I always like to quote sources, okay? People like John Williams say that the overt evidence is that the Treasury is selling 90% of their bonds, their issuance, to the Fed. And boy, the Fed is a top-heavy, a mess with the $3 trillion. And I had Jim Rickards on the show this past week, and he says, it's going to be worse. Now, this is an insider. This is not some crazy guy in a cave in Afghanistan.
Well, he actually gets checks from the government.
Yes, he works for him. He's a consultant for him. He played war games for him in the last couple of years, and we didn't do so good in those financial war games, incidentally,
right.
According to him. And he says, well, we're $3.3 trillion. The Fed's budget's bloated. If we have another meltdown, the banks are bigger. The leverage is higher. The next meltdown will be worse. That's I'm paraphrasing his idea here. And he's an insider investment banker, right? He was in the middle of long-term capital management in 1998. He's no shrinking violet. He works for governments. He's a smart guy. I imagine there's a lot of people out there hate him for telling the truth. But he says the next time we have this, what's the Fed going to do? Going to go from 3.3 trillion to 6 trillion? No, they're not going to do that. They're going to be tapped out, and the next time this goes down, we're going to have. That's why they're talking about bail-ins. They're talking about bail-ins, and anybody who thinks that their money is safe in a retirement account, forget it. We're not going to let the USS Kitty Hawk bob up and down in the Arabian Sea like a cork, out of fuel, out of ammo, no, that ain't going to happen. That's not going to happen.
Now, it's interesting that you'd say that you'd talk about bail-ins, because I think we need to talk about the Nasdaq malfunction or quote-unquote glitch that occurred on Thursday, in which the Nasdaq went dark for 3 hours with no explanation. We posted a blurb at sgtreport.com saying basically that if you don't understand how your e-wealth can disappear in a nanosecond, look no further than this Nasdaq glitch. All the powers that be will need to do in the future is issue a press release and blame a glitch or blame cyber terror, and everything you have could disappear in a nanosecond. And what recourse will you have? That was my question. What recourse, Greg, will people have when this happens?
What are you going to do? Load your shotgun up and go downtown to the Nasdaq? What are you going to do?
No, you're going to be standing in line as a creditor, and you are going to be standing in that line forever.
Well, I don't know if you saw my weekly news wrap-up. Did you see
that?
I
did. I watched it this morning.
Okay, so my consultant, let's start with, I don't know what happened. And you know what? The scary thing is they don't either.
That's right. Well,
okay.
They're saying they don't, but that's.
Well, okay, let's just take them at their word. Right? They say they don't.
Right.
Whatever. But so my consultant who works up in New York, smart guy, he's an old guy, he's like 43. He was in SEO, search engine optimization, before they had a name for it. Back when he started was, hey, how can we get people to, come to our website? That's what it was called. Now it's called search engine optimization. So he's been around a long time, knows a lot about search, the internet, big structures, big companies, worked for big companies in search, many big companies, like Boeing and drug companies and things like that, as a consultant for search. And so he calls me up this past week and says, hey, some weird stuff is going on. You realize that Amazon.com went down. Google went down for about just a little less than 5 minutes.
That's
Google.
Right. Yeah, I forgot
Google went down.
Yep.
Amazon.com went down. The server, a part of the Microsoft Outlook, which has 1 billion visitors a month, he says, and also the New York Times. And he says, these things going down occasionally for a few seconds, because they have so many redundant systems. They have so many redundant systems that, if they are down, they ain't down long. They clone their sites. They clone all their data. They have multiple dedicated servers around the country that ensures that, an earthquake or a flood or a wildfire or a terrorist attack won't shut them down, that they just switch to another area. They have their data gets wiped out. It's cloned. Mm-hmm. This is what he's telling me. He says, for them to go down for a few seconds before they're boom switched out to something else, mm-hmm. but for them to go down sequentially, for Google to go down one day, Amazon.com to go down another day. For Amazon.com, I think it went down for about 20 minutes. For New York Times to go down for a couple of hours. Yeah. For Microsoft to go down for a couple of days. And then bingo, then another day, we don't know what happened. Nasdaq went down. Yeah. I'm not professing what I know, but my consultant says this. When they say things like that happen, no. You don't have a sequential failure of behemoths with giant backup, with giant redundancies, and you don't have sequentially failing within about, 8 or 9 or 10 day period. You don't have that. Things like that don't happen. Period.
Yeah. It's very, very suspicious. And, I think it really speaks to this idea of currency wars, right? Which Rickards has talked about. I think we are on the brink of World War III. We can talk about Syria when we come back, but we're also on the verge of World War III in terms of these currency wars. One of the things that rubbed me a bit wrong about a year and a half or two ago was Jim Rickards making the rounds with the talking points that, the New York Fed really holds most of the world's gold. And he talked about holding Germany's gold and all these other countries. And he said, what we could do is just take the gold. We just keep the gold. We revalue the dollar with all that gold. And what are these countries going to do about it? And I thought, boy, I wrote a piece about it saying, well, if that isn't a call to World War III, and since that's happened, Germany has said, hey, we want our gold back, and the Fed said, give us 7 years. So we are really on the brink of World War III here, geopolitically and monetarily, don't you think?
Yes, I do. And I think, there's a French newspaper reporting as of yesterday that U.S., Israeli, and Jordanian commandos have been on their way to Damascus since the middle of August, right? Since 10 days ago or so. And that this is leaking out. You're going to see Iranian troops meeting U.S. troops and Israeli troops, commandos on the battlefield. You're going to see U.S. and Russians meeting each other on the battlefield. Yeah. And there's no more proxy. And but short of with that, what Rickards was saying, people don't realize we have this dollar swap that was opened up. I never heard it was closed down over in Europe. What would stop the Fed from saying, hey, remember that dollar swap we had? Well, we're going to disclose that we printed out $3 trillion and bailed out. How do you think that Europe kept from collapsing? Bundesbank. How do you think, Italy kept from collapsing, Italy, with your 2,400 tons of gold? Hey, tell you what, you can't pay us because you're broke, but we're going to take your 6,000 tons of gold because we printed all that money for you guys. What would stop them from doing that?
Yeah, I don't think anything will stop these people from doing anything they want at this point. They can shut down the Nasdaq for 3 hours, and the average American is like, I don't really even know if I heard about that. That's what's so concerning about the state of affairs in this country now. The average American isn't paying attention to what's going on in Syria. Why don't you tell us, just briefly, why it's so important that Americans stop being stupid. What's going to happen if people don't wake up to quote-unquote reality? 30 seconds here.
The short answer, they're going to be wiped out financially for a generation. If you're going to rebuild this country, you need solvent people, not people scrounging around for breadcrumbs and fuel and things like that. You need people to be solvent. Yep. You need people to have some wealth to be able to bring the country back.
That's right.
And nobody has any wealth, and everybody's like, oh, unscrew me, as we started out here on the show, then I'm sorry, you're not going to be unscrewed. You're going to be screwed. You're going to be unscrewed. Your kids are going to be unscrewed, and your kids' kids are going to be screwed.
That's right. And
you better wake up to the fact that you better do something to help yourself.
Now, Greg, before we went to break, we started to talk briefly about Syria. We were also talking about this coming collapse, and if people aren't prepared, they will be screwed. And
yes,
I think,
there's no question.
Yeah, and that's not hyperbole. It's not hyperbole either. So let's just talk briefly about precious metals. This is a short segment, right? 4.5 minutes in this segment, and then the next segment is a nice long 14 minutes. I know Rory has a very important question for you about Syria, but given the fact that if people don't prepare for the coming collapse, they will be screwed. How important is it in your estimation that people have some physical precious metals in their portfolio? Or even for those that think they have precious metals but they're in paper form, what do those people need to know and understand?
Number one, paper ETFs. I hate them. I loathe them. Unless you're George Soros and you can exit out of whatever your ETF SF is, which he did, with getting paid in physical gold, then you'll get paid in dollars. You're going to wake up and find out that the backing of the gold per share is not going to be there, in my humble opinion. Just like the gold in COMEX and LBMA are not going to be there. At some point, they're not going to let their last bar of gold, their last round of silver, the last bar of silver, walk out the door and say we don't have anything. At some point, they will not deliver anymore. But let me back up here to, I want to give a source. I don't want you to think that it's just me saying this. I have on Monday, and it's not a selfless plug, but you should listen to this guy, Jim Rogers, who's gone back to the 60s in investing. He used to work with George Soros, but don't ever mention George Soros to Jim Rogers.
I've always wondered about that. They started the quantum fund together.
His name, he says, don't you ever mention him again.
Oh, that's interesting. I've always wanted to, okay, that's interesting.
That's all he said. That's all he said.
Okay,
so he didn't say anything bad about him. He just says, I don't talk, I don't want to talk about him. Okay. Anyway, he's going to be on Monday, and he says, he ends the interview with saying, it's coming, be worried, be careful. And I asked him to go through, he said something pretty brilliant, and he said, if they keep printing, it'll be a disaster. If they stop printing, it'll be a disaster. Either way, it'll be a disaster. And I had him go through, okay, let's say they keep printing. What does it look like then? Okay, let's say they stop printing. What does it look like then? And he goes through it. This isn't a maybe. This is a guy with a $300 net worth, Jim Rogers. He's a guy who's been on every business channel as an expert and still considered an expert. Probably less now because he's telling people that there's going to be a big calamity, and everybody on the mainstream media when this Nasdaq thing, oh, don't worry, there's no losses. Everything's fine. Maria Bartiromo was listening to this. I couldn't believe she said it. She blurted out, is this a test?
Yeah, I heard that. I heard you tell us about it. Isn't that amazing?
I heard it. I heard it.
That's insane. Well, it is a test. It sounded like it was a test, but I'll let you finish about Jim Rogers. But I will interject that it's interesting that you have people like Aaron Burnett at CNBC, CFR member, Brian Williams at NBC, a CFR member, Charlie Rose, a Bilderberg attendee. You aren't CFR, Greg. That's why your information is so valuable to me. You're the real deal.
No, I'm not a CFR member, and I think that's evil. I think you're not a journalist if you're a CFR member. You're where you're going to work with the government to craft a message. That's not journalism.
That's right.
That's spin. So you're not a journalist. And they have their jobs, no matter how terrible they are. That's why the media, that's why the mainstream media, that's why CNN's doing so bad. I mean, they are doing bad. They're making themselves irrelevant. And on this note, I have a friend of mine who works at one of the other networks, and she works with one of the investigative reporters, he or she, and I'm not going to name names. But I tell her, I said, you guys this is too stupid. I know what a story is. Okay. I did investigative reporting. It's all I did. I did important stories where I had to have, where I, confronted the army in the middle of the Pentagon. Okay, well, you could drive a damn station wagon down the hallways at probably 40 miles an hour if you've ever been in there. A room full of colonels came in and lined up around to listen to this interview with this guy about depleted uranium. I know what stories are.
You're the real deal, an investigative journalist who's been hacking at the root for decades, and now you're doing it over at USAWatchdog.com, and we have 14 juicy minutes in which to embark on some real discussion about Syria. But before we went to break, Greg, we were talking about Jim Rogers. I want to let you finish that thought, and I just want to say this. I interviewed Bill Still recently. Bill says that we are at the tipping point, the biggest tipping point in world history, and he was discussing freedom and the fact that when this monetary system and these money masters finally lose control and the system collapses, it will be at that point that we can either all stand up together our liberty, or we can live in tyranny for generations to come. What was Jim Rogers' take on this coming collapse?
This is not a maybe. This is not a well. If the stars align right, no. We're in the soup, and it's coming. Period. The end. It's coming. And at this point, you better be doing something to protect yourself, because the idea so many people are asleep. I mean, 3% of the people maybe might know what's going on. I was surprised how well Bette Midler put out a tweet about Larry Summers, about how he, was a proponent of all these big bankers' salaries and how he caused the collapse and didn't say a word about it, and he shouldn't be the head of the Federal Reserve. Actually, I don't think we ought to have the Federal Reserve. We don't need it. We'd be a lot cheaper without paying them, giving them down our bonds at bare interest and them giving us Federal Reserve notes.
That's
so
right.
we don't, I mean, come on, we could just print the money. It'd be cheaper, period. But that's not the way it works. But Jim Rogers, it's coming. You listen to the interview that he lays out why it's coming, why either way, if they stop printing or if they keep printing, it's still going to blow up. And it's not going to be for your kids and your grandkids. That's 80s and 90s talk. This is going to be for us in the here and now and the not so distant future. He didn't peg a date, but the last thing he said was, "It's coming. Be careful." Yeah. That's what he said. Jim Rogers, who's a famed investor. And I want to say one other thing about why people are in the dark, and I blame it on the mainstream media. So my friend is a top producer at one of the networks. And he or she, I said, hey, listen, this is too big to miss. This is the same thing that happened back in 2007 and 8, which is, I think, why I got a pink slip from CNN. I was totally correct. We were going into recession. Housing was going to hit the tank. The banks were all in trouble, and all my sources said that. And for that, we don't need you anymore. Yeah. No kidding. I'm not kidding you. And I said, and this is happening again, and they don't want to do Benghazi. They don't want to do Obama's, listen, I did a story about the Maricopa County Sheriff's Department, right? Hey, New York Times. Hey, Wall Street Journal. Hey, Washington Post. The people who came up with Watergate. Take this, online presentation that the Maricopa County Sheriff's Arpaio's guys did on Barack Obama's digitally, mastered birth certificate. That's a fraud, according to them. And, make a fool out of them. Use this is an easy one. You could get a digital expert, you could get a computer expert to work gratis from the former FBI or CIA or whatever, and you could tear them down. Why don't you do that? Oh, no, they got ignored.
Yeah.
They got ignored. Now, I don't know whether or not he's a born here or not, but I do know one thing. Why didn't this would be like shooting fish in a barrel. If they're so crazy and so goofy, you could stop him from getting elected again. You could take him to the woodshed, pull his pants down, and spank him like a newborn baby.
Yeah, if he was wrong.
Why don't you do that?
Yeah, and all you were saying to your investigative journalist friends is, why don't you prove him wrong? If they're wrong, they're nuts. Prove them wrong. Right, but they won't.
That's an outrageous thing. He's saying that the president's birth certificate is a fraud. Well, then they ought to come down on him heel and spur. I used to work in their house.
Yeah. Well, they won't touch it with a 10-foot
pole. But anyway, and so fast forward to the day. So I'm telling my friend, just like 2 nights ago, hey, come on, this is too stupid to be stupid. I know what a story is, and so do you. And why aren't you doing it? But they don't want that. They just don't want it. My friend admitted to me, they don't want that. They just don't want it. They don't want anything on Benghazi. They don't want anything on the IRS, in which they're still doing what they're doing. They don't want anything. And they don't want that. They don't want to talk about the bad economy. They don't want to talk about that the housing really isn't fixed, that no bankers went to jail. I did something on my weekly news wrap-up. Black people ought to be pissed over this. Jesse Jackson Jr., a top political person, whether you like him or not, and I'm not carrying his water for him, but hey, he got $750,000 of money people gave to him. He didn't steal it. He just didn't use it correctly. He's getting 30 months in jail. John Corzine took $1 billion of people's money. No criminal charges. So we're going to put a black guy in jail for 30 months, and all these bankers that laundered money for drug cartels, laundered money for countries like Iran on the terror list, committed securities fraud, mortgage fraud, ratings fraud with LIBOR. Oh, nobody goes to jail, but Jesse Jackson Jr., we need his ass in jail for 30 months.
Yeah, well, that's because these banksters are untouchable. And I think if we can get back to your friends over at these major Mockingbird news media networks not wanting to cover real news, we must wonder who they take their marching orders from, Greg, because clearly
to do it. I'm telling you, this is why people are in the dark. Management does not want them to do it. Period. They'll pay you $1 million a year. And I'm not kidding you. They'll pay you $1 million a year to sit in your office and just to say, oh, we have investigative. Oh, we're doing cutting edge news. No, you're not. You're doing cats in trees and stupid kids being shot and Trayvon Martin. Yeah. And whether or not this kidnapping, which I don't really care about out in California,
no,
where the
I don't
guy
either.
burns the house down and kills the mother and the kid. Hey, that's like a one day, not I don't need to know everything that a horseback rider.
But look. This is why I get so passionate about this. It is so disgusting to me. The only time I watch CNN or Fox News during the day is when I go to the club and I run between 3 and 5 miles every single day, and there's a little monitor I can plug my headphones into, and I switch back and forth between those two ridiculous quote-unquote news networks, and they did cover that kidnapping thing in perpetuity for like a day, and it was just so incredibly aggravating to me.
Satellite shots, networks, travel expenses.
Yeah. No, it's just
rented cruise.
Look, the reason your website is taking off, and SGT Report is taking off, and Zero Hedge is huge, and InfoWars is huge, and Silver Doctors is huge, and SHTFplan.com is huge, is because people know. People can see through this stuff. More and more people are waking up. And I think this is an important conversation because I was watching Fox News the other day, and they are taking the official line on this Syrian chemical weapons attack. And it's absolutely despicable because these people are going to destroy humanity and thrust us into World War III because these people who have a platform, they have the airwaves, they have the ability to share real, true news, won't do it. And God help us all if the news media won't start being more honest. And they won't because they are controlled by these 6 or 7 major corporations and these banksters.
I had a friend of mine at a local radio station, and he was interviewing Neil Cavuto, and he says, hey, ask me a question about give me something to ask Neil Cavuto, who's on Fox Business. He's the, vice president of Fox Business. I said, ask him why they didn't say a word about the Bank of America getting $200,000 in debt forgiveness and these toxic mortgages taken off their $200 billion, $127 billion taken, just forgiven that they had put back, so they're from paper $40 billion a month, and $73 billion off Freddie Mac that they took off their books. $200 billion, one bank, not a word. They'll fight tooth and nail over $85 billion in tax increases, but $200 billion for one bank. And here's another question you should ask yourself: we're spending $40 billion a month, right? This is why both parties suck. We're spending $40 billion a month on the banks, right? Pretend I'm in Congress and I'll be Congressman Hunter on the Foreign Banking Committee in both houses. We're in Senate just about a month ago. I had Ben Bernanke and I had, Mr. Bernanke, Greg Hunter here, a congressman from North Carolina. I just have one question: which banks are getting $40 billion every month?
Silence.
You got it.
Yeah.
You mean, I know that, and all the people on the Senate and House banking committees, they don't understand that. I know that. I'm smarter than them. I'm Jamie Dimon. Actually, he's an idiot.
Yeah. Well, and just to interject, I think more than half of that money, I think it's $85 billion a month when you throw in the mortgage-backed securities, and half of the money is going to international banks.
Right.
More than half the money, Greg, is going to international banks. But look, we have to talk about Syria. We have 5 minutes left in this segment, and I want your opinion on what's happening in Syria because Fox News is towing the official line, so is CNN, even though the U.S.-backed rebels famously bragged that they had chemical weapons and they were prepared to use them when they released a video back in, I think, December 2012 in which they killed rabbits with poison gas.
Let's characterize them correctly. The Al-Qaeda Syrian rebels.
That's right.
Just like the Al-Qaeda Libyan rebels, where it was widely reported we took battlefield commanders and combatants against coalition forces and dumped them into Libya. And then they tell us, oh, well, we need to do drone strikes on Al-Qaeda here and there. Oh, we need to shut down 19 embassies all over the Middle East because of Al-Qaeda. And meanwhile, John McCain, that little weasel, is getting his picture taken with Al-Qaeda commanders. That's how high up. This is the highest ranking person of the United States of America to enter Syria. And who gets their picture taken with them? Members of Al-Qaeda.
Yeah. No, it's disgusting.
And so this is a whole boogeyman, Al-Qaeda's bad. Oh, really? Which Al-Qaeda's bad? The one we're arming? We lost 400 surface-to-air missiles, right? And Mueller's just on saying, his fear is an airplane being shot down. Really? With one of the 400 surface-to-air Stinger missiles that we lost control of in Libya?
Yeah.
That were on their way to Syria?
Yeah, I know it.
Yeah. Unbelievable.
His biggest fear or his biggest prediction? Because I think that probably will happen, and then they'll just lock down our liberties and strip more of our freedom from us in the name of fighting Al-Qaeda, which this government supports. So I know Rory has a very important question. Rory, what was your question regarding Syria, buddy?
Thank you. Yesterday, Greg, in your weekly news wrap-up, you briefly touched on the Saudi Arabian prince defecting, and you just brought up the Al-Qaeda working with the United States in Libya, working with the United States in Syria, and you had mentioned that Saudi Arabia could go the way of Libya. And well, how is that going to happen, and what would it take to make that happen?
Well, according to this prince, he says there's 40,000 political prisoners already. There's a huge crackdown of political dissidents over there. You're not hearing about this much. He's leaving because he thinks the royal family could be, thrown out of power, which they could. And, just like, they open up this can of words, and they may want to get rid of Gaddafi, who was shot in the head after he was, caught, incidentally. No war crimes there. And, then we have the whole Syria thing, which the stopper there is Russia and Iran. And I love my country, but I'm just telling you what's going on. And that's the reason why it hasn't fallen like Libya, is that Russia stepped in and said, no, you're not going to fly sorties over here. You're not going to, we have a naval base in Tartus. And they're not going to let that go. I think they spent $10 billion or so on that naval base in Tartus on the eastern Mediterranean. So the long and short of it is, yes, according to the Saudi prince, Prince Khalid bin Farhan Al Saud, says that, he's afraid of the anti-government, I think he defected. I think I may have got that wrong. He didn't go to Russia. He went to Germany. And but he's afraid of the corruption that's so bad that people are so being attacked and murdered, thrown in imprisoned, that they're having this uprising that could knock out the Saudi family out of power. How long do you think the U.S. petrodollar, oil is going to be traded in mostly dollars, is going to last if this royal family gets knocked out? How long do you think the U.S. world reserve currency is going to be the world reserve currency if the Saudi family gets knocked out? We have 12 trillion or more U.S. liquid assets held outside the country in stocks and cash and treasuries and government bonds. And how many of those have to be sold to have an OMG moment?
Yeah, and I think it's starting to happen. We see the bonds selling off. We see China getting out of their bonds. Everybody wants gold. Nobody wants this worthless debt backed by the faith and trust of the American government, because the government has no more faith and trust. This government has lost the faith and trust of everybody around the world, and it seems to me that the people that aren't getting it are the average American sheeple who still have faith and trust in this government, and those are the people that are going to be victimized. The next time the Nasdaq, shuts down and the Dow Jones shuts down and all of their paper e-wealth disappears overnight. What strikes me as crazy, guys, and I didn't mention this earlier when we were talking about new emerging truth tellers and truth journalists, but, Zygmunt Brzezinski's grand chessboard was laid out in the book he wrote, and this absolute nightmare unfolding in the Middle East is really going according exactly to his plan. Everything's going the way these insane people want it to go. And you live in an absolute matrix when his daughter, Mika Brzezinski, is a host over at MSNBC. What more do people need to know that they are literally living in a matrix than that, Greg?
Well, here's something about, and I changed computers, and I had a computer shut down about a year ago, and I lost this, but I was going to save it for when this thing blew up. and I probably could still find it on the air. But Niall Ferguson, the Harvard, history professor that wrote When Money Dies, I think he's a history professor. He was on with Mika Brzezinski, and she was back when this Arab Spring happened. And he says, well, I guess I don't fault you for thinking that way. A lot of people do. But this is an absolute disaster. I mean, I'm paraphrasing what he said. This is going to be an absolute disaster. This is not going to be good. Well, you wait, you give this a year or two, and this is going to be a calamity that of told proportions, basically, is what he was saying. And no uncertain terms, he thought the Arab Spring was the Arab nightmare. Bingo! He was right. Guess what? He ain't been back on, MSNBC since. That I can tell for it to talk about. They wouldn't have him on and say, wow, a couple of years ago, Mr. Ferguson or Professor Ferguson, Dr. Ferguson, you said this was going to be a disaster. You were right, man.
Yeah, no, they won't give credit where credit is due. And, you need look no further than Andrea Mitchell, who is also a host, an anchor, a person with her own show over there at MSNBC. And she's married to former head of the Federal Reserve, Alan Greenspan. I mean, It is literal insanity. These banksters have this republic completely locked down. They have it locked down in terms of the media control. They have it locked down in terms of the corporations. They have it locked down in terms of the black projects going on at the Pentagon. They have their tentacles everywhere. And I pray to God that we are able to take this republic back. And for me, we only have 3 minutes left here, but real quickly, what's your take on a person like Edward Snowden? We wouldn't even be talking about the NSA crimes if it weren't for Edward Snowden's courage, would we?
Well, no, and look what happened, even on Fox, this bubbled out, but it didn't bubble out but one time. And that, one of the guys on there, who was on there, Britt Hume, was talking about how nothing he said really has been, anything that we didn't already know from other whistleblowers that the USA Today had on the front page in 2005 and 4 and 7. And the USA Today did a story this past year about, hey, we told you so. This went on. These whistleblowers who were prosecuted, came out years ago. This is under the Bush administration. There's no difference between the parties. And so, no, I mean, he gave some detail like spying on our people and spying on our allies, over in Europe, and also, the detail about how big the program was, which was already big, and how he could, tap the, the president of the United States if he wanted to. That turned out they said, oh, no, that's not true. Well, it is true. And so, I think he's a whistleblower, and isn't it sad that Russia is protecting our whistleblower?
Yeah.
I mean, Manning came out. The most provocative thing Manning put out in USA Today, our view, he deserves his 35-year sentence. Really? He deserves a 35-year sentence for a helicopter video of gunning down, 15 people, with a 50 caliber machine gun? He deserves that?
Yeah.
And then nobody who was on the other end of those machine guns when they were obviously unarmed, and I think somebody had a TV camera, nobody went to jail for that, but he goes to jail for 35 years. I don't care whether he cross-dresses or not. I don't care.
Well, I think that's a psyop, too. I think who knows what they did to that poor kid when he was essentially being tortured for, months and months on end, held in basically a dungeon. And who knows what they did to that poor kid. And maybe he, has always had conflict with being a man or a woman or whatever, but what a great psyop for other potential truth tellers, for other people in the military who might otherwise whistleblow, who are now going to, subliminally tie this sort of whistleblowing with somebody who is actually, got some sexual identity issues. I think it's a big psyop, personally.
I think what the main thing is that you rat us out for the evil stuff we're doing, and you spend 35 years in jail.
Well, you're right. Yeah,
and that's what I think the whole message is.
Yeah, and there will be
chilling effect.
Yeah, and there will be character assassination and everything else. Look, there's only 90 seconds here left in the show today, and I wish that we had another hour. Greg, I just think that you are really a shining example of what it means to be an American patriot, and certainly a shining example of what it means to be a journalist. I want to thank you so much for what you're doing over there at USAWatchdog.com.
Thank you. It's very kind of you.
Well,
I just want people to wake up and try to protect themselves. That's the main number one thing they need to do right now. I mean, they need to have some assets. I mean, some people shouldn't buy gold and silver. They should go buy a new set of tires for their car. They should go buy, 4 or 5 bags of rice, maybe, 10 cases of water. They should go and make sure that if we have a currency calamity, that the food may go away for a few months. You got to be able to take care of yourself, because that's what I think the FEMA camps are for. Oh, would you like to have some food? Would you like to have some power? We can take this FEMA camp here.
Yeah.
That's how they're going to get people to go. They're going to be desperate people that are going to be starving.
Yeah, destroy the middle class, then they will destroy the republic, because there will be no one left to stand up against these banksters.
That's right.
The same one with the tentacles spread all over the globe. Greg, shout out your YouTube channel for everybody and your website, will you?
USA Watchdog YouTube, USAWatchdog.com, and also Greg Hunter. I think you find it on YouTube. Watch Monday, Jim Rogers.
Love you, Greg. Thanks so much for your time, and thanks to everybody for tuning in on UnboundRadio.com.
Bye-bye.
Bye.